Good evening. Once again, Spectrum this evening is actually an excerpt from last week's Action Line. The morning of Thursday of last week, Dr. Conrad Schwartz, UBC psychiatrist, expert in the problems and dangers of LSD and the research he has done on it, was my guest on Action Line. In discussion here, the reason for repeating this at this time is for the benefit of students who may have been in school at the time that Dr. Schwartz was on the air with me last Thursday, and also for the benefit of parents who are looking for ways and means to warn their youngsters of the dangers of LSD. One issue came up at the beginning of the program. Dr. Pat McGeer, the day before in the legislature, had called for the firing of professors and teachers who advocate the use of LSD, marijuana, or other hallucinogenics. So far as I'm personally concerned, I don't go along with Dr. McGeer on this issue at all. I suggest that this is censorship of the worst kind. A university, a school, is a place for the discussion of ideas, even though you might have dissenting ideas. The only thing I feel is necessary is that teachers and educators, to whom youngsters look up, should be controlled in their statements, particularly when discussing something as dangerous as LSD. The first question I put to Dr. Schwartz at the beginning of the interview was based on this premise and suggestion of Dr. McGeer.
Well, I agree with the feeling behind it, that in fact any responsible person who advocates the use of these drugs certainly should have limitations put on his ability to influence some impressionable young people on this. I think whether they're actually fired or not is a decision at a level in the university or in the school system which is really beyond my competence.
But it would suggest that this is irresponsible to recommend the use of something like this, particularly since there are immature but impressionable youngsters listening.
With that, I would quite definitely agree. It's not only irresponsible, it's ignorant.
Now, sir, many of the questions I have had in the past 2 weeks since we brought this up with Sergeant Bellamy of the Youth Preventive Squad have come from parents who are alarmed, and they are perhaps almost panic-stricken at the thought that, A, their youngsters are using this or even contemplating its use. Therefore, the dangers involved here, sir.
Well, there's a whole long list of dangers involved, of complications occurring in people who have used LSD. In the acute intoxicated state, of course, there are many dangers due to distortions of perception, distortions of time sense, of distance sense, and also because of the confusion which can occur under the influence of this drug, which can lead to delusions of a paranoid nature. For example, a person can believe that they're able to walk on water or are able to fly, despite Leary's claims that this is the real reality. Nobody has yet been able to do this under the influence of LSD. They are also, and have been in some instances, dangerous to other people around about them under the influence of LSD, because they may have a paranoid fear that other people are making threats towards them in a physical sense or in a psychological sense. One of the commonest delusions under the influence of LSD is, in fact, that people around about one are making homosexual advances towards one. And this may, in fact, precipitate some action against the individual.
Now, this is a problem that has raised its ugly head, and I use that phrase advisedly, in our schools here and even among some educators, so that this could be compounded by the use of LSD.
Yeah, I think that would be correct, yeah.
And the point of your making the remark that people who advocate its indiscriminate and uncontrolled use are ignorant means that not only are they ignorant of its use, but ignorant probably of the after effects of this in people's lives.
Oh, I think a number of the people whom I have talked to about LSD who have advocated its use are really very naive in some of their ideas about how this drug works. and about what it does.
Well, let's kill this one point once and for all. So you mentioned Leary's remarks there, and a number of young people, obviously impressionable young people, have tried to suggest that this takes them away from reality and shows them actually what they think is real reality. They get the idea that they can walk in the forest and they can walk among people, and they are going back in time, and they are seeing.
Leary, of course, has made a number of conflicting comments about LSD. His theory of how it works is extremely simple and is not in any way supported by scientific evidence. However, I think there is one thing which Leary did write down in one of his productions, which I think it gives some indication of one of the dangers of LSD. This is Leary's definition of a psychedelic session. A psychedelic session is a planned temporary suspension of old imprinting, an opportunity for planned re-imprinting, the structure of which should be determined by carefully planned set and setting. This is a classical definition of brainwashing.
This could be dangerous in any respect, sir, and I presume now, the matter of brainwashing, suppose, for example, some person who has no use for society or who has great egomania and wants to take over in society, wants to take over the minds of the young, for example. Could they use this to this end?
Well, I think they certainly could try. There are indications that there are suggestions that some of the people who proselytize about spreading LSD around certainly have some very grandiose ideas about themselves.
For parents particularly who are concerned about this use and the increasing use in this area, how would a mother or a father be able to tell if a child is using this and yet hasn't told them the story?
Well, I think you threw in the rider at the end there. I would hope that most parents are in sufficient communication with their children, that if the children get into trouble, as they will if they use LSD, that the children would be able to communicate this to the parents directly. Now, if the person will not give the information that he has actually taken LSD, it is somewhat difficult to make a completely clear-cut diagnosis. However, there usually is in the acute stages, particularly with the stuff that is being pushed around Vancouver as LSD, which is very impure stuff. The dosage is completely inaccurate. With this, there usually is some degree of confusion. There may be an incoordination in muscular movement, in some tremor, and agitation. There is usually a tremendous tendency for mood swings to occur. The person may be bright and cheerful, happy, laughing 1 minute, acutely depressed, tearful, the next minute, will have considerable difficulty in saying just what kind of thoughts are on their minds, will often complain that their thoughts are racing ahead of themselves or are going too slow. The only physical sign of any constancy, but it is fairly constant, is a dilatation of the pupils, a widening of the pupils in the eyes. This occurs during the acute LSD intoxicated state and can persist for some time afterwards. This will also cause some difficulty in dealing with lights. People will complain that lights are too bright and so on. And this may occur for a couple of weeks afterwards. I had one patient who had to go around wearing dark glasses, which is somewhat inappropriate in the middle of a Vancouver winter.
Well, this too would probably indicate some of the people who are supposedly the hippie set wearing dark glasses. But again, what is behind the mind or the thinking of people who advocate this use as a social prop?
I think this is a very interesting question, and I have given quite a lot of thought to it. I've discussed it with a number of people. Everybody has different ideas, of course. The feeling that I'm moving towards, really, is that this is an expression of rebellion, but it's a very peculiar one. It's a form of what I would tend to call passive negativism. It's an opting out rebellion. It's not the kind of rebellion that challenges the issues, that tries to meet with them directly, tries to change the things that are being criticized. It's a kind of a negativism which says, oh, to hell with it, let's opt out.
And this is a highly dangerous thing, of course, for youngsters who are in the formative stage in their teen years. I have no doubt that you would agree that they can rebel, and rebel very sensibly, against what they feel is wrong in adult society. But to do it this way is not only dangerous to themselves, but dangerous to everybody around them.
Yeah, I think this is what really could occur if the use of these drugs became widespread. One of the people who's written quite a bit in this area is Aldous Huxley, and he said a number of sensible things about it. Timothy Leary takes little bits and pieces out of Huxley's writing, usually misquotes him, usually uses his statements inappropriately, and misses a great deal of the balance which Huxley used when he wrote about the drug mescaline, which is quite similar to LSD in its uses. And I'd like to read you a statement out of Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception. He says, "The mescaline taker sees no reason for doing anything in particular, and finds most of the causes for which at ordinary times he was prepared to act and suffer profoundly uninteresting. He can't be bothered with them."
This would suggest, therefore, too, that the people who advocate its use as well as the people who use it, as you say, are opting out to hell with everything around them. But what I'm getting at here is the fact that these people who advocate its use are perhaps far more dangerous in our society than we would even like to think initially.
I think there are indications that some of the people who make public statements advocating the use of LSD have got a very emotional chip on the shoulder, which they're having difficulty in expressing in any positive fashion.
See, the thing here is that, again, we come back to this idea of rebellion among the youth. There's no doubt in the world that when youngsters start asking questions, they want answers. If they don't get answers from their parents, they're going to go out to their teachers. But if they take this tack, then I suggest that they're going to become drones on society and might even wind up in mental homes.
Well, they're not really asking for answers. The LSD group are not really asking for answers. They're saying that they have the answer, that there's nothing that can be done. I think the majority of young people today are certainly asking questions, but the majority of them are involved in trying to think up some positive answers to this, and in fact taking positive action. You can see this in the student protest movements across Canada particularly.
What do you think of these student protest movements, Dr. Schwartz? Are they really achieving anything, or are they again a refuge for the people who want to hide their head from reality and face the day-to-day problems of living?
Oh, I don't think you can say that. I think a lot of the people involved in the activist movements across Canada are giving up a great deal to be involved in this and are putting a lot of effort into it. There are, of course, some fringe groups who are expressing quite confused ideas as to what they want, but in general, the student organizations are expressing their views quite clearly and quite positively.
The youth today, and we have had this problem raised on this program on many occasions and are still trying to find answers, appear to have lost communication with people of my era and your era, particularly their parents.
Well, it's kind of funny. The language, the content may have changed a bit, but the process probably hasn't. Even if you take this LSD movement, what's happened really in Western society over the past 20 or 30 years or so has been the development of labor-saving devices, of instant coffee, instant cream, instant communication with telephone, television, radio. And really, LSD movement itself really offers an attempt at instant emotionality, a very dangerous attempt. But in effect, some of the people who are using LSD are really trying to perpetuate the tradition of their parents who tried to make things a bit more easily available.
Now, moving from LSD into the use of tranquilizers, we have discussed this on this program too, and again you have studied this. What is the reason for this? Is there really an undue pressure on students in school today, particularly the high school level, where they are getting closer to either going to university or going out to make a living?
Well, I think probably the pressure tends to be put off now into the university years. This is becoming somewhat longer. It's interesting that an increasing number of young people are taking a year or so out of university during their careers, during their courses. A number of young people in Canada, for example, are going off overseas on the CUSO organization, are getting involved in accompanying young Canadians. Down in the States, they're getting involved in the Peace Corps. It's interesting that almost every Western country has got the equivalent of CUSO. That is a group of young people who have got together and who go overseas into underdeveloped countries and spend some time there, and then bring these experiences back into their own culture and feed them in. All these groups in different countries throughout Europe and in North America really came up pretty spontaneously without too much awareness that this was happening elsewhere. They all came up about the same time. The CUSO organization, in fact, was a couple of months ahead of the Peace Corps.
You have been quoted as saying in your report on Canadian campus health and psychiatric facilities that they are confusing, misleading, and inaccurate. This was the statement from Dr. Ronald Treitz, a psychologist at St. Patrick College, about your report on Canadian mental health in the universities and I presume also in the high school level. In other words, you have stated here, and I quote, that mental health, I'm quoting Treitz here, claims that you implied that mental health is synonymous with mental illness and therefore is the sole responsibility of psychiatrists. Now, this would seem to be one of the biggest problems among our young people today and between parents and young people and in the education facilities, that there is not enough, definitely, help available for the student who has problems that are not concerned primarily with his schoolwork, but are concerned with his own mental processes.
Yeah, now I'd like to clarify this point about Dr. Treitz. I've written to him directly asking him to clarify some of these newspaper reports that I've seen, because they indicate that, in effect, he has misinterpreted a great deal of my report. I did not make any claim that mental health on campus was the sole responsibility of psychiatrists. In fact, my report showed that 55% of students felt a need for advice or counsel on emotional or psychological problems at some point in their university career, whereas I suggested that only 5% of these should be seen by psychiatrists. This leaves 50% who will have to be dealt with by general administrative, educational, and counseling procedures. And all of these are requiring considerable changes in order to make the university courses and the university life a meaningful experience to the individual, which he can contribute back to society after graduation.
The action line number 7319201. The guest this morning, Dr. Conrad Schwartz, UBC psychiatrist. On the line from his bedside in Burnaby, my partner Emmett Cavicki. Emmett?
Good morning, Roy.
How are you, sir?
Fine, thank you. Good morning, Dr. Schwartz.
Good morning.
You have any questions for Dr. Schwartz to begin with?
I have. Roy, I'd like to ask Dr. Schwartz if he has, in his studies, ever come across anything regarding the youth in the communist countries. Now, the reason I was asking this, I've just read a couple of books on the method and the control of youth in communist countries, and they seem to be not singularly free, but comparatively free of the problems that we're experiencing here on the West Coast at the present moment regarding drugs and so on?
Well, it's an interesting question. To my knowledge, the only place that pure LSD is being manufactured now is in Czechoslovakia. It is no longer made by the Sandoz company, who produced it for use in the Western world. Now, there have been reports that, in fact, LSD has been used in experiments on brainwashing, not only in Eastern Europe, but also in the United States. One of the criticisms of this was that the outcome was so unpredictable, and this is one of the extreme dangers of the drug, that the individual response is completely unpredictable, that in effect it did not prove to be a consistently useful drug for this kind of purpose.
Now, this could be dangerous as far as our youngsters are concerned, and I think I can see what Emmett is getting at here. If you use this in a brainwash or for a brainwashing technique, are we getting therefore close to the situation in world living, and particularly our system, as opposed to the system in the totalitarian states where practically every parent has to be a psychiatrist?
I don't think so. I think if every parent attempts to be humane and loving in relation to their children, I think we'd reduce a great deal of the problems that are arising.
The only difficulty there is that
throughout the world.
The only difficulty there is that you have people in authority who are, as you said at the beginning of the program, who are ignorant enough to recommend the use of this sort of drug, and also the attitude of rebelling and compounding that rebellion without showing the youngsters any responsibility.
Yeah.
Well, I think Dr. Schwartz, from the books that I have read, and I've only read 2 of them, but that the Soviet youth seem to have a purpose where they glorify work and sacrifice on behalf of the state and society, and the youth seem to accept the challenge and grasp it and do something with it. Whereas our youth seem to be singularly free of a challenge. In fact, I think I would condemn our youth just as much, and perhaps even more so, if they didn't rebel against what they are inheriting from our generation.
But rebel without the use of props.
That's right. I think that this just becomes LSD and marijuana become a prop or a crutch for the weaker ones. The people who have a basic deficiency. They are unable to face reality. They want to hide or escape from it. They just don't have the mental initiative to face up to the facts. But surely that there's nothing that you can talk about to your children today regarding honesty and decency, and yet your parents go to the store and the girl in the Safeway makes a mistake of a 95 cents on your bill, and they don't go back with the 95 cents. They see them on camping trips coming back from the States, and they've got a bottle of liquor smuggled someplace. And yet they say to the children, you've got to honor the laws and the regulations of the country. And yet everything the parents do is a straight hypocritical act. You have us talking about glorifying the free enterprise system. You got the president of General Electric and Westinghouse going to jail for price fixing. You have unions in the control of gangsters. You have Hoffa. And in his example, I mean, where is there an image of excellence for the young people today?
Well, I think it's very difficult to find one. I think young people are certainly looking for it. I think they certainly need it, and they respond very favorably to anybody who attempts to deal with them consistently and fairly.
Don't you feel, too, that we have a responsibility here, right here in this particular studio and in this particular industry, to be more responsible in our outlook toward youngsters, instead of
For example, and feel free to criticize it because I've criticized it, the type of music that is played for youngsters today, that lends an atmosphere of responsibility from our side, when in point of fact we're being irresponsible with our pronouncements and with our attitude by playing this sort of rubbish to these youngsters.
Well, I think you'd have to put up a pretty strong case to convince the youngsters that the music that they're involved with today is
Yeah, but this is our job to put up a case. Because
well, I
we are
don't think
parents.
so. I think this is, I don't really think that this is dangerous.
Dr. Schwartz, don't you feel that the approach to the problem of LSD in the high schools, where it is now acknowledged that there is a problem, and I'm not trying to judge the seriousness of the problem, but the fact there are some students experimenting or taking it or have taken it is the problem that I'm trying to enunciate here. And then for the school board to come along and say those who take it shall be expelled, the police taking action and saying that they'll get criminal records for taking it. Surely these children need help, not punishment.
Well, I would hope that you know that positive help will be offered to them. I think it's fairly clear that in the case of marijuana, for example, this is quite definitely against the law, and I think there is a definite indication to take the appropriate disciplinary measures against anybody using it.
Would you advise any legislator, Dr. Schwartz, to fight hard to have the use of this put on the criminal code or under the criminal statutes, and at the same time, while Emmett's point is well taken of helping the youngsters, rather than take punitive measures against the parents?
Well, in regard to the first point, I myself would like to see very heavy legislation against people who push LSD. I would not like to see legislation against people who use it, because I think this tends to put people in the wrong place. Namely, it puts them in a jail instead of in a position where they can get help. However, I've had some discussions about this and with a number of people, and nobody has yet come up with any other way of dealing with this dangerous problem other than making it a legal offense to be in possession of this drug LSD outside of medical and research circles.